The Fresh Economic Thinking Podcast. New ideas and analysis with Dr. Cameron Murray and Jonathan Gadir.
Hi Cameron, how are you going?
Great, Jonathan. Nice to be talking again.
So, the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill. Are we going to talk about it?
I think we should. The Truth Commission, the Tsar. Yeah, I think it's pretty dodgy. What do you think?
Well, let's talk about what it is first. I think the world might be divided into two groups of people at the moment. There's one group of people who were traumatized in some way by what happened in COVID, or had experiences that kind of transformed the way they look at the world. And then the other group is looks at COVID as like a wonderful period of time when everyone just came together and did the right thing, and we all proved how much better Australia was than America and that kind of thing. So there's the kind of two groups of people. That's my theory. Anyway, so let's talk about the Misinformation Bill. The Australian Communications and Media Authority will, according to this bill, be given power to require social media platforms to publish policies about dealing with mis and disinformation, and require them to implement and maintain a process for handling complaints about mis and dis. And there's going to be some penalties. The ACMA is going to use graduated, proportionate, risk-based approach, blah, blah, blah. Civil penalties of up to 5% of the social media platform's annual global turnover is what's on the cards, which is for a company like Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, that could run to hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, right? And what I think is we'll probably end up with an enforceable misinformation code replacing the voluntary code that we already have. And it's all about, in the language of the proponents of the bill, the government, empowering users to identify misinformation, disinformation, to respond to it, to complain about it, and then to, have the, it's sort of incentivizing the platforms to act on those complaints and, report back to the ACMA on every year or whatever, or every quarter, on how good they've been at actioning all those complaints. So that's what it is.
Okay. So can I just pull you up? So it sounds like we've got this regulatory authority, the ACMA, Australian Communications Media Authority, that already regulates media organizations in some ways. And they have various voluntary codes, but now they want to add a special mis and disinformation code that's not voluntary, that requires them to deal with complaints and then fine them if they don't take down mis or disinformation. Is that the basic gist of it?
Yes, but they don't have to. It's not about policing takedowns or cancelling certain people who are posting something. It's more it's broader than that. It's like this, as usual, the ACMA. This is consistent with the way they're supposed to do other regulation. It's like a wide spectrum, shall we say, of regulatory tools, like an infringement notice, a warning, a small fine, a bigger fine. You know what I mean? Like a formal warning, that kind of thing.
Yes, it sounds like there's a bit of an issue though. So they're adding this new thing, mis and disinformation. Like, why is that any different from current requirements for news reporting and things? Like, that seems shady to me.
Well, I think we should probably look at what the definitions are, because this is what's triggering me. I'll put my cards on the table. I'm completely opposed to this from top to bottom. But then I think to myself, given my background, where I worked in fields where the ACMA was the regulator, and where they were widely seen as lazy, useless, kind of in bed with industry, never doing anything. I'm like, well, if they continue on with their, usual form, maybe I shouldn't be worried and I shouldn't bother opposing it, because it's not going to do anything. But anyway, I'm in two minds. Like on the one hand, I'm freaking out. On the other hand, I'm like, ACMA joke.
So the thing that worried you was what they're trying to define as what misinformation, disinformation, or harm. Like, yeah. So let's go through that.
Let's look at that. Yeah. So causing harm is actually bundled into the definitions. So here we go. Misinformation on social media has to meet 4 of the following elements. The content contains information that's reasonably verifiable as false, misleading, or deceptive. Information is intended to include opinions, claims, commentary, and invective. Now, as this is not my original thought here, but didn't we used to just call that being wrong?
Yeah.
You know?
But
sometimes.
I mean, like, can opinions be wrong? Like,
well, that's the thing. Like, you could
commentary
bundle
be
something.
wrong?
Yeah, like you could bundle something factually incorrect into an opinion, but then, you could have a prediction about the future in your opinion, and how can that be proven to be wrong? It can be outlandish.
Yeah.
So then the next point is the content is provided on the digital service to one or more end users. The provision of the content on the digital service is reasonably likely to cause or contribute to serious harm, and the dissemination is not excluded. So they've got some exemptions.
So hang on a minute. Let me just quickly, you've got the digital service for one or more end users in Australia. So what about my WhatsApp group chat?
Yeah, that's not included. That's exempted.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Lucky.
But you know what?
Because you don't want to know what's in those group chats.
some people were advocating for that to be included.
No.
They didn't get their way. So the disinformation is those 4 elements we talked about, plus another element. The person saying the stuff has to intend to deceive.
Oh.
Right. So
like, this is, to be honest, can I pull you up? Because this is clearly a joke, right? Because people don't even know their own intentions. Like, we have psychologists spending weeks with people, right? Trying to understand their motivations, get people to understand their own motivations for things. So policing intent seems like really big. I don't know. It's some kind of sci-fi movie, right? Where you have a bad thought, but you don't act and they still put you in prison. It's not coming to me, but it sounds dodgy. Like, it sounds just like a child wrote this, right? Don't you think?
Intent is part of the way you can prove a criminal act, right? The mental element. But when you're coming to apply it to, words, effectively, that's very...
Yeah, I can get a sequence of acts where one act relies on previous planning and demonstrating intent. But, you ask your kids why they're in a fight with each other, they don't know. Like, I mean, I don't know why I'm doing stuff. So anyway, not to worry. So I'm a disinformation person, or I can't be if I don't know my intent. I don't know. Keep going. What's next?
So I told you before the types of harm are bundled into the definition. So the types of harm are, first, harm to the operation or integrity of an electoral or referendum process in Australia.
Okay.
I think we know where this is coming from.
This is like, basically because of the voice referendum.
Yeah, I think so.
It's basically saying we lost because of disinformation. Okay. Yeah. Next.
Right. Harm to public health in Australia, including the efficacy of preventative health measures.
No. This is obviously COVID. Can't have people questioning the vaccines might have side effects. Like,
not just harm to public health, specifically including the efficacy of preventative health measures. Love it.
Like lockdowns. I guess they call that preventative health measure as well. This is just okay. I can't believe those two. It can't be any worse, can it?
Those are probably the 2 worst ones. Vilification of a group in Australian society, intentionally inflicted physical injury to an individual.
Does that mean my words are designed to motivate someone to inflict physical injury?
I think I might have
Okay.
slightly misquoted. Imminent damage to critical infrastructure or disruption of emergency services in Australia, and
Oh.
imminent harm to the Australian economy. I mean, you
So
know,
does that mean like when the who are the people that have been gluing themselves to the road about climate change? I mean, is that imminent damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of emergency services to use Facebook to organize that?
I think so. I think
Oh,
I think all the environmentalists might be in trouble. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so basically, it sounds like the Labour Party doesn't like the fact they lost the voice referendum, so they've made questioning the integrity of electoral or referendum processes a form of harm. They want to maintain credibility about COVID restrictions, and so they've added that specifically. And they don't like the Greens blocking traffic, so they've added one for that. And I think the only reasonable one is about motivating others to inflict physical injury on certain groups or individuals, which probably falls under existing rules, would it not?
Yeah, exactly, and the electoral one, that's there are existing rules about, like, you're not allowed to say, oh, you can only vote on Friday when it's actually and Saturday, or you can only vote here and when it's actually there. That's already illegal.
right.
Um,
So this sounds dodgy to me. Like, I hope the listeners are on the same page. If you're not, please leave a comment.
well, everyone's got until the 30th of September, so pretty soon after we're recording this, to put in a submission to the Senate committee, which is, it's ridiculous. It's like 2 weeks, the whole thing. They're slamming it through. They're really slamming it through. Yeah.
And do you know,
Um,
just before we dig a bit more, which part, like, is the opposition supporting this, or the crossbench, the Greens? Um,
it's running into some trouble, but if you're asking me whether I've been following where the parties are all sitting on this at the moment, I don't know. On the
okay.
crossbenchers, I also don't know. Um, so what triggered me on this
Yeah.
explanatory memorandum that they put out is there's this thing called the Statement of Compatibility with Human Rights. It's in every piece of legislation explanatory memorandum. It's a
Okay.
requirement. It's usually just an essay. It's just, in this case, it's a really long essay. And what it does is it says, some policy officer in the department is assigned to write it. And the task is to say how whatever the government is proposing, whatever the legislation is in accordance with human rights. That's basically what, it's like a debating exercise. Like, whatever
Okay.
it is, it's all good. It's in accordance with human rights. So in this case, you know how, like, a bunch of people said some things during COVID, like you, for example, maybe,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and they turned out to be correct, but at the time they were just like labeled as crazy, as purveyors of just
Mis
insane
and
ideas that would
disinformation, right?
cause,
Yeah.
that caused the deaths of elderly people all across the country because of your irresponsible ideas.
Yep.
Um, what was
Yeah, I
that thing that
remember
happened to
Gigi
you
Foster.
on?
Did you
Yeah,
remember her on Q&A? Saying, we don't have to panic and lock down society, and everyone called her a grandma killer, a granny killer. And, and
yeah,
yeah, that would have easily been caught up in this, right? But then does that make the
and
the ABC responsible for what she says on Q&A?
well, that's it. We'll get to that. We'll get to
Okay,
that.
let's get to that.
Um, but just remember how, whether it was about masks, whether it was about all
Mhm.
those measures to stop people visiting their elderly relatives in aged care, whether it was the border closures, whether it was um, whether there were any higher than normal in terms of vaccine risks to
Yep.
the new vaccines. See, all those people, or even the origins of the virus, the
Oh
lab
yeah, yeah,
leak,
yep.
right? The fact that it was, an accident in the lab. So all those things that were labeled early on as conspiracy theories, and then later the mainstream kind of thought, oh, actually, this there might be something to this.
Yeah.
Well, that never happened. See, according to this explanatory memorandum justifying this legislation, what happened was only the opposite. What happened was that conspiracy theories undermined the confidence in the important public health measures, and these things were allowed to spread unabated by social media. So remember how social media companies took down accounts of very qualified people because they said something like, there might be some problems with this mRNA technology, it might pose some health. Remember, like, people who are really expert in accidents in labs saying this looks like an accident from a lab, and they were taken down as purveyors of misinformation. That didn't happen. The social media platforms, according to this explanatory memorandum, allowed that to spread unabated, you see.
Oh my God.
So the quote is, the potential for health-related misinformation and disinformation to undermine the right to the highest attainable standard of health has been firmly established since the COVID-19 pandemic. Misinformation and disinformation that might have this effect could relate to how a disease is spread, the safety and effectiveness of vaccines or other preventative health measures, or health treatment options not supported by clinical data. I'll stop there, but it goes on.
Yeah. So this is from let me just recap. This is this memorandum that's written to accompany the bill to explain its logic. It's like an essay for people to understand the legal term, structure of the bill. And it basically,
specifically the part which says this is why it's compatible with human rights.
Right. That is amazing. I find that very bizarre. It's pretty funny because I've just been Googling while you were talking. The Australian Human Rights Commission says why misinformation bill risks freedoms it aims to protect. So
yeah, that
the
was last year.
Human Rights Commissioner doesn't seem to agree with that memorandum explaining why it's compatible with human rights.
Yeah.
Isn't that bizarre?
So we move to the next thing. So let's think about how this would work if this bill goes through. So someone with let's say with a degree in social work on Twitter complains that a Harvard immunology professor is spreading misinformation about vaccines. Twitter doesn't do anything about it. So that person complains, they're not doing anything about it, they're not doing the right thing. ACMA investigates. They'll assign a couple of senior investigation officers with arts degrees, maybe one guy has a law degree, to decide if this is or isn't mis or disinformation. Now, how are they going to do that? And this is something that is being said by, let's say, a Harvard professor. They're going to Google it. And they're going to select from maybe some articles they find online that are debunking this guy, maybe from a so-called fact-check organization, to reach their preferred conclusion.
Wow.
And I would say their conclusions will be what all right-thinking people who are plugged into the right news sources know to be true, just based on their genius and their gut instinct, and their solidarity with other expert, tertiary educated, middle-class people. That's my assessment.
Yeah, I mean that sounds so far-fetched, that hypothetical there, Jonathan. It's just, that something like that couldn't ever happen in real life. Like, oh my goodness. So what then happens for Twitter if they do nothing? And this, who did you say? Some social worker complains about the comments of a Harvard immunology professor. What does
maybe
the
they'll get a
ACMA
fine.
do?
Maybe they'll get a fine. I don't know. But like, did you know that after this goes back to your question about, well, what about the ABC's responsibility for what's being said on their show or whatever? Well, did you know that after the Bondi attacks in April 2024, according to the government's statement of compatibility with human rights that I've just been quoting from, did you know that social media users wrongly named some completely random innocent guy as the attacker? I knew that because I watched it. I watched Media Watch and they had it on that. But do you know what the statement of compatibility with human rights doesn't mention? It doesn't mention who else also named that guy. And you know who did? Let's say Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10,
What?
undoubtedly with a lot more reach than random social media users. But, wait, do you know who's exempt from this bill? Yep. Professional news content. So professional news content defined as those guys who are already regulated by the ACMA. Channel 9, Channel 7, Channel 10, the newspapers, blah, blah, blah.
So hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. All those things you just said about content being deceiving, intentionally deceiving, and we talked about, how do you know what people intend, causing harm, questioning the referendum and stuff. They've gone to all this trouble, then exempted the mainstream media anyway. So
They
the
have.
Guardian can say their view, Fox News or Sky News can say their news. Channel 7 and 9 can just repeat what they saw on Twitter anyway, and they're safe, but Facebook and Twitter are not. Is that really, really what's in this bill?
Yes, but they would say there's a logic to that, and they have said
Okay.
that there's a logic to that, and that is that
Okay.
they're
I'd like to.
already regulated by ACMA codes, that the ACMA occasionally, maybe, once a year, would give them a rap over the knuckles with a sternly worded report that they come out with after they respond to somebody complaining, so they've already got a code that they're policed by. That's the
Right.
line.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm still kind of confused because, Twitter doesn't publish the news. Twitter is just like a telephone line. People just put their noise on it, just like WhatsApp. Think of it as a big WhatsApp group chat. I don't get how they can become responsible for monitoring everything everyone says and then testing it against whatever an ACMA, investigator might deem right, wrong, lying, deception, or any other of the nonsense definitions. And so there's this 2 week period we're in right now, where we can make a submission.
There's only 4 days left as of the time we're recording
Oh,
this.
wow.
So,
Okay.
yeah. But I mean, we did have an exposure draft last year, right? So when we
Okay.
weren't paying attention, well, maybe I didn't pay as much attention as I should have, but there were plenty of people who did. Like 20,000 people did respond to the department's exposure draft consultation. So,
Wow. That's quite a lot. Yeah.
yeah.
So can I just check, how does this fit in with what's happening globally? So let me have a bit of a rant on the general principles here for a moment. And I wrote, and I'm just writing a draft article for Fresh Economic Thinking, and it's about censorship. And I'm quoting myself from January 2021, and I wrote this: further censorship of voices that reveal how irrational and costly the policy panic was in terms of human lives and livelihoods will continue to be shut out of the mainstream. Um, Now, that's a terrible sentence now that I've read it back, but basically, I was predicting 3 years ago now that those in charge during the pandemic would have to make a big effort to write the history books their way, to be seen as the heroes and not the villains when history looks back. And I feel like, given that one of the main harms is, questioning public health directives or whatever that was, I feel like this is, part of that global story. And I feel like it's similar things are happening in the UK as well. Um, they've got a similar thing. Are you aware of that one, Jonathan?
Yeah, I have heard of I haven't studied it. Yeah, I have heard of the police. I think they've got some weird definition, like a non-crime hate speech act or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the online safety bill, they call it. Divisive internet rule becomes law.
So if I can, yeah,
Yeah, carry on. I just think it's good to point out that there's a bit of a global trend right now that we need to zoom out and see this as part of that. And if Australia sort of uh, defeats this bill,
yeah,
the trend might still continue and another one might rise in its place.
yeah.
Yeah.
So again, putting aside the fact that to date, in reality, the ACMA has been useless and lazy on everything. Let's just say they're not suddenly, and they're actually taking this very seriously, and they're an active regulator. The idea built into this law is that that we shouldn't have tolerance for any dumb or gullible person anywhere in the world to be convinced of something stupid. Like, belief in something, in stupid things, has to be wiped out. And so because we can't tolerate or accept that someone somewhere will sometimes be convinced of something that's outlandish and stupid and a lie and wrong, we're going to just do away with, freedom of expression to stop that. And I think it is class coded. There's this idea of the intelligent, reasonable, middle class person who follows the science as explained to them by official sources, who trust institutions, who, of course, completely deserve to be trusted and are never captured by vested interest. Yeah. And they're plugged into the right sources of information. And then on the other hand, poor and stupid, low information people who don't read the right newspapers, listen to the ABC, and they're taken in by devious or crazy anti-vax / conspiracy theories, etc., etc. It's never about. This is not about dumb middle-class people believing unscientific conspiracy theories like, for example, let's think of one. Natural immunity is not as good as vaccine-provided immunity because the government said that. In fact, they premised your ability to travel on it. They premised your ability to retain your job on it. And they haven't backed down from it. Not never. So it's not about that. It's, like the entire explanatory memorandum has not one example of, oh yeah, something that we said that turned out to be right. And actually, remember we did an episode on the fuck up tax?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So where is the right to a remedy when down the track something that was labeled as misinformation turns out to be right? Where is the right to redress when you've been falsely labeled as a purveyor of misinformation? That's missing from here as well, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Where's the fuck up provision? Oh yeah, we said that was
The
misinformation. It's not anymore.
Well, I guess you can tell that the people drafting this bill don't, that the idea that that could happen has never crossed their mind. And the way they wrote that explanatory memoranda saying, COVID was a huge success for governments everywhere, not a step wrong, except for those dastardly purveyors of misinformation on social media. Everything else was perfect. So I really don't think they've even considered that they might get it wrong and people will be, or companies will be fined and I guess encouraged to remove people's accounts. They'll be given lists of people, I guess, from ACMA if they do a good job of people who are purveyors of misinformation to take down. I mean, this just.
Yeah, well, this is a good place to remember some exemptions. So they've been shamed into removing from this version an exemption that existed in the first draft, in the exposure draft, which was anything published by a government was actually excluded from being mis or disinformation. And that was too much even for some supporters of this bill to stomach, I think.
Yeah.
Also, the bill, as we said, it doesn't apply to professional news content. Now, like, what's professional news content? There's this, they're now, building into this bill this idea that, journalism is this sort of expert thing that's done by people in these like special organizations. And that in itself is untrue, and it's a way of stifling people by giving this exemption to people, journalists that work for the big companies, and
Yeah.
saying like people that do great work who happen to not work for these big companies, they're not really, they're not professional news content producers.
Yeah. So there's a classic
Yeah.
point in economics, right? That all regulations end up advantaging incumbents. and preventing new entrants. And so it seems like this is another example in media of giving the incumbents a huge head start, because, you can kind of say whatever you want. If you're an incumbent, you're not subject to these mis and disinformation claims. It makes me wonder
Yeah.
about, the guy who runs Six News, the high school guy, Leonardo Puglisi, I think his name is. A bunch of teenagers run this, they call it Six News on Twitter and online, and it's really good. So those guys, I guess, are going to be caught in this. And if the mainstream media doesn't like what they say, I guess they can complain. Is that also a possible thing that
Yeah, anyone
channel?
could complain, but the idea is that first these social media companies have to promulgate a code that you know, or a complaints process, and then they'll probably be given leeway to a couple of years to get it up. So I don't know if there's going to be any risk, immediate right now risk, but there's a long-term risk. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like if I was a media company and there was some kind of upstart social media news channel that was getting a lot of traction, I would make complaints about them. If I was, Fairfax, I'd complain that my journalist, Michael West, we fired him or he left and now he started his own online thing. He'd be covered in this, and I
Yeah,
wouldn't want
his
him competing with
posts
me.
were his posts are you know irresponsible, peddling misinformation.
Questioning the
Um,
referendum. I mean, come on. No, there was some dodgy things.
isn't it funny that they put in, well, not funny, but like just so outlandish that they put in that it includes invective and opinion? Like, oh, I wonder maybe in a referendum or an election, do you think the people with passionately held opposite views might think the other side is pushing falsehoods? Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that that could
Yeah. So
be,
this,
right? I'm just thinking through as you're talking about, like trying to remember back to the referendum, some of the crazy things that I read. I mean, so there were different varieties of crazy things that I read on
yep.
social media. And they weren't just on social media. Like I read some crazy things that were in the official arguments that were published and distributed to everyone by the Electoral Commission. Like there were some very specific crazy things, like there's a cabal of powerful people who are making all the decisions. Whatever. Okay, fine. They meet. They meet in the High Court every Wednesday night. Like, okay, that's wrong. That's a lie. Or if it's not a lie, it's just bullshit. Depending on what variety of mental state you want to apply to the person saying it.
Yeah.
But then you have like more high level predictions about the future that I think are stupid and would never happen. But like, oh, it's going to lead to a two-tier society if the referendum passes, with a privileged elite of, Aboriginal people and everyone else, or people's houses are all going to be confiscated. Okay, they're outlandish, idiotic predictions about the future that are never going, that, in my opinion, are never going to happen, right?
Yep.
But like, at what point do you draw the line and say, oh yeah, actually that prediction has a 50% chance of happening rather than a
Yeah.
0% chance of happening? Who's you know what I mean? Like, what?
Yeah.
It's just not
Like,
worth it. It's not worth it. What are you achieving? Okay, so one, you're going to achieve the fact that no one will believe dumb things about Aboriginal people. If they want to believe dumb things about Indigenous people, they're going to believe it.
yeah. Yeah, and there's a bit of the Streisand effect, I think, as well. There'll be situations where someone is censored for something, or this act, the investigators act on a complaint, and Twitter's fined or something's taken down, and the news will report that incident and essentially amplify the claims that were made that were misinformation through their
Mm.
reporting of the banning of it. So,
Yeah.
every time this has the effect of banning someone or fining a company, it also has the effect of amplifying the claim that was apparently so terrible to hear that it was called mis or disinformation, right?
But with the operation of this thing, maybe it will just happen silently, because the government, the ACMA, can't ban anyone. They're just, it's what's going to happen is the social media companies will just have an incentive to just remove people. bang, your account's gone, misinformation, bye. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to
Yeah, so I'll
be.
give you an example, right? Elon Musk was asked to, take down a bunch of accounts in Brazil. Um, I wouldn't have known anything about those accounts or what they said. Probably no one in the world would. But he was asked to take them down, so he tweeted about it. Now the whole world knows about those things, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah,
So
but that's assuming some desire to push back by the companies that are subject to these incentives.
that's a
Yeah,
fair point. Yeah, I guess.
which they might. They're not. Yeah, maybe they. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just wonder. Like, you can label this a conspiracy theory, but it's pretty convenient. It's a pretty convenient way to get around the US First Amendment if you can go to a friendly country like Australia, have the Australian, which has no, here in Australia we have no free speech protection, or not anything really substantial, and
Yep.
you can get let's say a penalty of up to 5% of global revenue. Well, you've kind of achieved something there without which you can't achieve in the US because of the
Yeah.
First Amendment. So you're kind of using your allied countries like Australia and the UK. Um,
Look,
so
that's
yeah.
totally consistent with the what's been written and how it would operate. But let's see if Substack, YouTube, Apple Podcasts take us down for suggesting that could be one element of the design of this thing. Um,
Mm.
yeah, it's a
Um,
bizarre
I'll just
situation.
I'll just to, I know we're sort of, we've been running long, so I'll just briefly say there's a very tightly, carefully worded exemption, and notice how tightly they're policing, here who can give an opinion and who can be an expert. So dissemination that might be considered for an academic, artistic, scientific, or religious purpose could include. So this is like, an exemption, could include
Okay.
informed commentary by an academic on a matter relevant to their expertise. For example, commentary by a legal academic regarding a recent judicial decision or academic publication in their field. A
Hmm.
post by a researcher sharing the results of a scientific study for the benefit of others working in the same field, right? All these a post by a religious leader promoting or explaining religious practices or doctrine. This one really pisses me off, because if you're going to be in the world of objective truth and facts and follow the science and blah, 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 what are they doing putting
A
just
religious
myths
exemption.
of religious stories which are not factual in here as a legitimate opinion as an expert on what, you know
Yeah. Look, that's really weird because, the informed commentary by an academic, Jay Bhattacharya, comes to mind with his many attempts. He's the Harvard virologist. He was very much cancelled in many ways during COVID for expressing his expert opinion on the matter relevant to his field of study. But I guess it wasn't for academic publication, or yeah, maybe that wording is tight enough that he can only talk about it if he's talking about a study he published. Very, very
yeah,
weird.
I know what this is like. Oh, there's this guy who's um yeah, he's in some other field, I don't know, physicist or something, and he's commenting on the studies from COVID. And there's like a geologist guy who comments on climate change studies, and they don't agree with the mainstream. It's like, that's what this is about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
wow. Mate, this is just an amazing example of uh, a political response to everything I've experienced and you've experienced since COVID in terms of the way the public conversation was had online. And I feel like this is just like a big brother attempt, piece by piece. Everything we saw we didn't like, we're going to add a clause to it, right? Uh,
yeah,
questioning the election, questioning lockdowns, questioning this, academics talking outside their field. It's just like hammering every nail they saw with this just basically ability to ban or fine the company that, the social media company that hosts them. It's kind of ridiculous,
and they provide these examples of how to assess serious harm, because to have the chance to complain about something, it's got to be serious harm. Like, that's the threshold. I mean, I don't mean like you need that threshold to complain to a social media platform. I mean, let's say a post has to fall within that threshold of serious harm to be subject to these rules. So one of the examples of how to assess serious harms, I think, undermines the whole thing. They just didn't notice it. So what they said was, that this is an example. They have a few case studies, and one of them is false, misleading, or deceptive information about the benefits of a particular diet with clinically proven adverse effects could harm public health. But that might be determined that the harm is unlikely to be serious because it is unlikely to have significant and far-reaching consequences for the Australian community or a segment thereof. This may be because the author of the content is not authoritative enough to sway large numbers of Australians, or because the harmful side effects of the diet are not that significant, or, this is the important bit, because there is enough other information available on the relevant platform on healthy diets to counter the false, misleading, or deceptive content in question. Well,
what?
Are we seriously saying that, okay, well, if that's the case, well, I agree with that. Okay, so if that's the case, what topic has no alternative points of view? This is what platform hosts only one point of view on a topic?
Yeah, these are platforms with hundreds of millions, if not billions of users, where people argue alternative views on everything every day. Right?
So their case study basically says, nothing will reach the level of serious harm, but they didn't realize that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And I think healthy diets is just another one of those examples where no one knows what a healthy diet is anyway. It's the classic case of eggs are healthy this year, then they're unhealthy next year, right? According to the mainstream, this is almost the greatest point, example to put there of there are so many topics we actually don't even know what's right or wrong, what's good or bad. So I would have avoided that completely in my explanatory memorandum if I was passing this bill. But they've gone and thrown it in there. And I'm like, diets. Here's just another case where no one even knows what the truth is. And you think you might want to police some information on social media. That's wild, isn't it?
I mean, there's a point in there about algorithms pushing one type of content to people. And that's a legitimate discussion. It's not good if people are only getting one thing and not the broad range of points of view. But that's kind of a separate topic.
It is a separate issue. And it's, as a parent with kids who watch YouTube, luckily they mostly watch fishing and basketball YouTube, so the algorithm rewards that.
Okay.
But you can definitely see, there's a bit of a black hole if you start going down this conspiracy theories, and the algorithms feeding you more of the same. So that's not covered at all here, right? Of how you deliver the content. It's about what the users on your platform say.
Yeah.
Look, that's maybe we should wrap it up there, because that is I'm still processing everything you've said today, Jonathan. That's
well, do a submission, guys, listeners.